The mineral rights deal proposed by the Trump administration has been leaked, and it appears to be one of the most absolutely insane deals I have ever seen put on paper by the United States or just about any country in the international arena. Just how does this deal manage to piss off literally everyone and somehow also make Russia even less amenable to peace talks? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about this leak and the what appear to be just unforced errors on behalf of the current administration. Okay, so this is, again, I'm here. I want to caveat this because, again, I have said this repeatedly on this channel. I am rooting for the Trump administration. They have many opportunities, and part of their opportunities is because they're willing to question assumptions about the international order, about what America can and can't do, and that can sometimes be used to strike real fear in the hearts of America's enemies. So when I see them make unforced errors on the international arena that set all the pieces back for no meaningful gain, it really leaves me scratching my head, and I'm obligated to call it out. So I know you guys are going to be in my comments and be like, well, you weren't this bad about Joe Biden. Guys, how can I be mad about someone who was literally a dementia patient, right? My complaint about the guy was he didn't do anything. But now I guess I'm getting my wish because instead of an administration that does nothing, I have an administration that does a bunch of absolutely absurd, crazy shit. And I'm going to break down why this is such a big deal right now. Okay. So this is from The Telegraph. This is the original source that leaked it. Trump's confidential plan to put Ukraine in a stranglehold. And this is a U.S. Backed demand. It said, they're attributing it to the U.S. president, but that is unfair. This is from the White House. This is from the administration. This is from operating collectively. And I don't always love when we personify the problems because, again, Trump was president before and he didn't make these kinds of deals. Someone smarter spoke truth to power and said, listen, this is what these kind of deals need to look like. And no one appears to be doing that right now. So Trump has demanded a $500 billion, what they're calling a payback from Ukraine. And you may note that the actual aid provided to Ukraine was only about $180 billion. So the fact is that Ukraine is finding out, by the way, you might notice that word aid, that aid is, well, it's a gift. It's like going to a food bank, right? And you don't get, right? A food bank and a grocery store are different in that I pay for the food at the grocery store and the stuff at the food bank is aid. I don't need to go to a food bank, but there's one in my neighborhood and they're very, very busy this week. So the fact is that Ukraine, the U.S. has come to them and said, oh, remember that time you visited the weapons food bank because you were in crisis because you were being invaded by a hostile neighbor? Actually, all that time, we're actually a grocery store and we've been billing you. FYI. Yeah, there were no price tags. Yeah, we didn't tell you that there was a huge interest rate, but there is. It is a literal 300% interest rate on those things that you now found out were a loan, right? And I point this out because, again, if that were to happen to you, right, you would get a lawyer. You would sue them, right? You would call the cops and be like, hey, there's a business masquerading as a charity perpetrating fraud in which they are retroactively charging people for services that they never agreed to provide. And the problem is on the international sphere, in the international stage, you can't necessarily do these things, right? An international arena works more like a neighborhood. We've talked about this, right? So the neighborhood, so it's about consensus. And the problem, that's almost more dangerous in some ways, right? Because again, if you piss off all of your neighbors and there is no one above your neighbors to stop them, the level of isolation and that you can be subject to is actually worse, right? Because remember, if you're like an annoying neighbor, at the end of the day, there's a limit to what you can do to them. You can't burn their house down. You can't kick them out. You can't just say, you can't cut off their water and sewage, right? The cops will show up. But there are no cops in the international arena. And so the U.S. is saying, well, there's no cops. So why can't we retroactively charge people? Why can't we scam our allies? And the problem is they don't seem to consider the alternative, which is to say, Well, what are all our allies going to think if we start scamming them, right? Ask yourself, what does Jordan, for example, where thousands of U.S. troops are based in order to fight ISIS, what is he going to say when they look and say, well, wait, is the U.S. support to the Jordanian military? Are they going to send me a bill for that, right? What about other U.S. allies like Japan, who's raising its military, right, has large U.S. bases that they host in order to counter Chinese influence? Is Japan going to go, hey, is the U.S. going to send me a 300% interest rate bill for the defense aid that they've been providing for 50 years? They're going to go, man, you provided Ukraine aid for 3. South Korea, for example, has had U.S. military aid for 50 years. And what are they going to say? Are they going to say, damn, what if America wakes up and sends us a bill? Right? They're going to say, listen, we can't risk it. We can't have America. Maybe we should just do a deal with China. Maybe we should do a trade deal with China. But listen to the terms of the actual deal. This is the other problem. They're so bad that no country would accept it. Again, Ukraine, who is actively fighting an invasion, still thinks this deal is so bad that they cannot do it. One, it grants U.S. economic, they're using the word colonization. I don't like to use those. I don't like to expand the definition of words. And it's not colonization, it's economic. It's an economic extraction for reparations is what it is. But the reparations, I guess you would call it, are in legal perpetuity, which means forever and ever and ever. So actually, $500 billion is probably a low ball, right? Because it's going to be forever and ever and ever and ever, right? And the fact is that it includes, listen to some of these absolutely insane terms. The U.S. will take 50% of recurring revenues received by Ukraine from the extraction of resources, which means that it appears to be talking about the Ukrainian government. If the Ukrainian government says, hey, listen, we are going to have a 15% tax on, for example, all of the cobalt that comes out of our mines, the U.S. is going to get 25% of them. And you may be like, Paul, Ukraine's going to have to rebuild its country and at the same time pay a 50% of its tax revenue back into to the United States, the richest country on earth, right? And it's going to say 50% of the financial value from, quote, all new licenses issued to third parties for the future monetization of resources. So again, every tax associated with a license to mine, right? There's going to be a lien on revenues in favor of the U.S., right? Which means that, of course, the U.S. gets paid before, before things like rebuilding Ukraine. All future licenses, the U.S. will have a right of first refusal to purchase exportable minerals, which means that if the U.S. wants them, it can purchase, it has to have the first right to purchase them. Now, you may notice that there's not a price limit here. So that means that if the U.S. says, no, actually, we want that cobalt and we want it for free, Ukraine's going to have to cough it up, right? And so Washington will have sovereign immunity and near total control over most of Ukraine's commodity and resource economy. This joint fund that it's going to be created, a shell company that the U.S. will operate, shall have the exclusive right to establish the method, selection criteria, terms, and conditions for all future licenses and projects. This is total economic domination. This is literally selling out the countries. Remember, this is private property we're talking about. Right? The Ukrainian government, while it controls things like licenses to extract minerals, it doesn't actually control the land, right? The land is likely held by private companies, again, a mining consortium or something. And so it's not clear that Ukraine even has the right to go in and tell private property owners who can and can't be on their land, who can and can't mine their land, right? Now, again, this is something where Zelensky is like, yeah, you guys could definitely have a stake in these rare earth elements. As we've talked about, I think this is something that was kind of implied the entire time, that in part, one of the reasons that the U.S. chose to intervene in Ukraine, or rather chose to support Ukraine in its fight against Russian aggression, and not, for example, Russia's 2008 invasion of Georgia, or even intervene in support in 2014 after the Euromaidan revolution, when Russian-backed separatists took the Donbas, is because there was in addition to being a disruption to the international order, there's also an economic reality that Ukraine, a country with both a large young working population and a large amount of natural resources could become westernized, which means, as you've seen, that there is the potential for access not just for the United States, but to all of Europe as well. So everybody stood to make an economic gain by having this great trading partner emerge. And part of that relationship is that in times of crisis, again, it wouldn't be so much that the US government gets a check, right? Though it would indirectly get a check because, again, there is some level of import control, some level of tariff that happens on natural resources brought into the United States or on goods produced with those natural resources. But it wouldn't get a direct check from the government of Ukraine in this way. But what it would have is, again, a deeply westernized country. You can sit there and go, hey, listen, things are getting a little scary with China. They're getting a little big for their britches, and we need to put them in their place economically. They say, listen, your friends at the EU, your friends in Canada, in the United States, we buy 80% of your cobalt anyway, but we're all agreeing not to sell rare earth minerals to China. Are you in? Right? And that's how this Western bloc, this Western economic bloc works. They go, yeah, because it's not going to cost me anything, and it's going to stop a rival of our biggest trading partners and supporters, right? You're like, that just sounds like friendship with extra steps. And it basically kind of is, right? You create these networks there of high trust and high collaboration and coordination, and it becomes so powerful, right? The best way to think about the power of the Western world is that we all agreed on shared values. And so we all agree to play generally as a team on important things. And so what it happens is that when you're an international bully like Russia, that you don't have the same kind of friends. And it means that when you take the field, Russia takes the field with just Russia, and the US takes the field with every Baltic country, with the France, with Germany, with the UK, with Japan, and any other country. So it goes, damn, I can't believe I'm going to stand against a whole. I gotta score and win against an entire football team, and I'm one dude, right? And that's sort of the power of the system. And so when you sit there and play these kinds of games, where you retroactively send bills to your friends, where you just say, we're going to literally scoop out your stuff and make it ours, it isn't clear that it's any better than just a trade and grow deal. Okay, that's the number one thing to take away from this. And we've done the math on this channel, right? If you use, for example, Poland, let me do this again because I think it's so important. Poland is a great example because in 2000, right? Okay, so let's see. Let's see if we can get it. Total trade volume, US and Poland, 2000 to 2024. Okay, let's see if they can get it for us. All right. Okay, so unfortunately, old Gemini doesn't really have this anymore, right? But let's see, we got some World Bank data. I want to point this out because in about 2000, Poland was a lot like Ukraine. It was an economically impoverished post-Soviet state. It had kind of like a free government that had only been around for maybe a decade. And it was in a tough spot, right? But it chose, like Ukraine, to make this move into the Western community of states. And what happened? Well, you can see that the all products exported to the United States totaled, let's see, what's that? About 11 billion with a B dollars, including consumer goods, fuels, miscellaneous capital goods, machinery and electrical, raw materials, intermediate good, transportation, chemicals, plastic, food, rubber, metals. So what happens when we look? What was it like in 2000, though, right? And again, this didn't require us we never made an agreement to extract value from Poland, but you can see that it did approximately, what's that? That is less than 1/10 of that amount. So by allowing the Polish economy to grow over 20 years, we didn't extract from them, but instead, what we did is simply say, let's keep trading. The U.S. knows full well that the more we trade, the more our economy grows, the more the government gets in taxes, right? The government still got taxes from Poland indirectly through, again, importation tariffs, through taxes on U.S. companies that did business in Poland, on U.S. companies that imported Polish goods, right? So there's this huge tax increase. But the difference is Poland loved every second of it because they too grew by tenfold, right? This is something that, again, the foreign policy establishment can easily explain to a businessman like Trump. And the fact is that Trump deliberately cut these people out. Remember, they came into government and they said, we want to fire everybody who has policy in their name. And this is what you get when you have someone who doesn't bring in policy. You don't have someone who sits there and does the homework and says, what's the best way to structure this kind of mineral rights deal, right? And the answer is clear that this is not it. This is, again, an unforced error, right? A better deal would have Ukraine high-fiving themselves because they would say, wow, we're going to grow economically. Our country is, our people are. We're going to have more money, a bigger economy to help rebuild our country. We're going to have guaranteed investment from a foreign partner like the United States, which is huge for a developing country. And we're going to be happy to sell these goods to the United States. And yeah, we'll pay some import duties, but that's fine because it's going to grow our economy. So again, a different deal would have Ukraine high-fiving themselves as they paid us, but not this deal. Instead, this deal, the Ukrainians are literally using the word colonial. They're saying this is a deal that would effectively, and they're using this word to reflect the fact that this is how, not necessarily like Europe, like UK style colonialism, but it's actually sort of the Spanish 1700s when they weren't really looking for colonies to settle. They literally would just sail ships to the New World, force the indigenous people to give them whatever gold, silver, and valuables they had, and then would sail those ships into Spain, into Europe, and in turn that would fund the monarchy. That is a brutal way to do things. And one of the reasons people point out, draw this analogy, including that Telegraph article, drew the analogy of the Second or the First World War, is that you might recall that the First World War, Germany lost, and the Allied powers said, we spent a lot of money defeating you, so you're going to pay us back for everything we spent because, we killed a generation of people. The problem is, what they learned is that when you've destroyed a country and you've killed all of its working age males, they don't actually have the ability to pay you back. And so instead, what happened is that things went really badly for their economy, right? Their economy went real bad. And then every other economy in the globe also fell apart because when you have a major industrialized trading partner like Germany have hyperinflation, total collapse, starvation in the streets, that doesn't just stay in that one country, right? You had an economic collapse that also occurred in Europe, in the UK, and then eventually in the United States in the form of the Great Depression. And you might recall that between the 1950s, when the Great Depression, American and global economic growth resumed, and the 1930s, there was another series of events that was bad that happened in Germany. So you really don't want to economically cripple a country, particularly with this kind of extraction type of sanction or reparations. You may say to yourselves, as I think we're justified in saying, listen, when the U.S., we spend about 50% of our budget is a deficit, and when we do that, right, it doesn't feel good to swipe in the credit card 50% of what you spend every year, and to say, listen, we want some of that back. And that's not wrong, right? I don't think that's an inappropriate mentality, all right? But I want to point this out. Here is from the the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. This is a .org website, but it's from the U.S. Budget Watch 2024. So it's pretty legit. And they point out that at least in 2022 and 2023, the defense budget. So this is all the money that the United States spent on all of its military personnel, airplanes, aircraft bases, food and housing for soldiers, uniforms, boots, big weapons, small weapons, nuclear weapons, all of it. And that for every dollar we spent, for every $6 we spent on the Ukrainians, we spent $93 on American soldiers, or soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. and spacemen or whatever. And so I point this out because we're talking about, again, 6 cents out of every dollar spent on defense went to Ukraine. That is a rounding error. That is nothing. And what did we get for it? Well, again, if we weren't half-assing it, we would have been able to defeat Russia if we had just gone in with one fell swoop, a huge aid all at once. This is my complaint with the Biden administration, is that we didn't fight Russia. We just kept arming Ukraine to deter them, not realizing that we actually encouraged Russian militarization. So I think the Ukraine support, it was like taking half a course of antibiotics. I think we should have just front-loaded. We should have made this number be like 12, because if we had made it, again, 12 cents of every dollar spent on U.S. troops, that would have enabled Ukraine to absolutely wipe Russia out of their country, and every other dictatorship and asshole in the world would sit there and go, damn, I really can't fuck with the United States. Now, though, everybody has two pieces of pretty rough information. The first is that the U.S. can fuck you at any time, right? They can send you a bill for anything they've ever done throughout history, regardless of whether you agreed to do it or not. Two is that the American American support is conditional. And, I think, and the Americans are beatable. That's the other point, right? Is that America will fuck its allies, and they actually aren't that interested in defeating their enemies. These are two really bad messages to broadcast to the globe. And in one administration after the other, we've managed to somehow broadcast two awful pieces of data to our global rivals. Now, before we talk about why I think this is and some of the fallout from this, particularly in Russia, and why actually Russia seems to be more aggressive than ever, I wanted to make two asks. The first is, of course, if you want to support me, you can hit that subscribe button, or you can check me out at combatvetnews.com. This is my version of Patreon, where members support me, keep me independent, able to criticize just about anybody because I take no money from media outlets and no money from governments. And oh, by the way, uncensored combat videos drop every Tuesday and Thursday, including literally today. As you're watching this, I got at least 3 videos sent to me by the guys from the Liut Brigade. Supposedly, they've just had a rotation into Touretsk, so there's a bunch of fresh drone pilots causing all kinds of absolutely insane shit from to the Russians, and we have videos of it that no one else does. So definitely become a member, check that stuff out. But two, you might remember our friends in the ATE team. This is the elite recon unit of the Ukrainian National Guard. They've moved over to the Rubiza Brigade, and they are doing a huge fundraiser to try to help them out, right? And you may note, right, we did the tour of their team's house. They're actually, I think they're expanding now. I think the team is actually going from just the 4-man dudes to a much larger formation. But if you're interested, the link is in the description. Help 99. This is the NAFO Brigade. These guys are on an active campaign, and I'm going to be completely honest with you. First off, I love the ATE because they were so cool to me when I came and visited. I mean, literally showing me through their entire house, doing hours of interviews with me. They were so candid, in fact, that about 50% of those interviews have been spiked. So because they literally told me shit that was too crazy and they could not get it reviewed. Their command, their team, like we were just laughing about the crazy stories. But then their command was like, no, dude, you can't release those. So I have an affinity for these guys. I think you guys do too. And also, I want to point out they have the sickest patch of maybe any unit. In fact, it is so sick that I'm gonna donate twice because my neighbor was literally like, "I love the Vikings, the runes. It's so badass." So yeah, I'm gonna literally just donate twice so I can get him a second Viking patch. So the link to that is in the description. And thanks to all you guys that have donated. Literally, the other units sent me a text. They're like, dude, I can't believe you got us the cars. So they are so stoked that you guys helped them out. And honestly, it means a lot to them when they see these lines in the U.S. government. They think, oh, is America sold us out? Has the West sold us out? But the truth is that the American government can do what it does. But America is of the people for the people, and they cannot stop Americans themselves from supporting Ukrainians, fighting for freedom, and fighting for the right of their country to exist as a democracy. And again, despite what every edgelord and shitbag politician maintains, democracy and Russian-style autocracy are not just kind of sort of the same thing. So thank you guys for everything. Now, let's talk about who I think is responsible for this, right? And the name on this document is the U.S. Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent. Scott Bessent is exactly the kind of person who you would think would give this kind of deal. Imagine somebody who would think it's a good idea to give somebody something and then charge them afterward. Well, you'd think, well, man, they must be either an American healthcare executive or, ding, 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 a hedge fund manager, right? The only other option, of course, would be private equity, which he probably is. But classic French Huguenot ancestry, guys. So old Scotty, right, he founded a $1 billion hedge fund in 2000, and of course, basically founded another weirdly named group in 2015, which received a $2 billion anchor investment from George Soros. Interesting, fascinating, right? And again, this is somebody who has never held a public position. He has never been a public servant in any capacity, not for 1 second of his life. In fact, before 2024, he appeared to have never donated. He donated in 2016 to Donald Trump's campaign. And then in 2023 and 2024, he donated more than $1 million personally to Trump's campaign and raised more than $50 million for the campaign. That's it. That is his entire public sector experience. And then that got him nominated to the Treasury. The problem is, of course, that normally, right? I'm not going to sit there and say that someone with exclusively private sector experience, you should take them. It should be a very exceptional person who has sufficient private sector only experience to run a government agency. Because even if you're a hedge fund, even if you interact a lot with the Treasury, right? Someone like Jamie Dimon, for example, would be a good example of somebody who's only private sector experience, but has a lot of experience with the Treasury. This was someone who held multiple meetings with the Treasury throughout the 2008 financial crisis and the SVB bank failure, right? Like a major bank, an institutional bank. This is somebody who was in a private hedge fund. In fact, these private hedge funds are not even regulated like banks. They are way less regulated because they're private, because they are available only to accredited investors. They have almost no regulation. And so almost no is being generous, but they have very little regulation compared to a major bank. So this is somebody who has only been a sort of secondary customer of the Treasury. It's sort of like saying, imagine you get put in charge of Amazon because you're Amazon's biggest customer. And he's not even that, because you're one of the customers of Amazon, right? You'd be like, no, dude, I'm not qualified for this. And so this is the kind of deal you get when you put somebody who doesn't have the qualifications into the Treasury. And normally what happens is that person sits down and is surrounded by people who have spent their whole careers at Treasury. And they sit there and go, listen, let's talk about what it is that we do and how we can do it well and how to leverage your best attributes to maximize a leadership of the Treasury. Again, that seems to be something that someone like Pete Hegseth is doing, where he's trying his best. I really think he is. The things he says are not unhinged. It's pretty clear when he's talking administration talking points and when he's trying to actually run the DOD as best he can. But he says, listen, I'm a television personality. So I do my best when I'm in front of a camera. I can be a great charismatic secretary in this camera media focused way. And I think he has people telling him that. But the problem is Treasury was the first place that Elon Musk and Doge went, and they just fired everybody. They fired so much top leadership that there's no one to tell Scott Bessent that this is a bad idea. There's literally no one to help him guide his way through the Treasury. It's just the blind leading the blind. And that's how you end up with these total international fucking disasters, right? You're never going to, unless the US backs away from this as fast as fucking possible and issues a total apology. It's like, this document was never authorized. That's what I would do. I would be like, this was authorized by Fall Guy X. This was never approved by the White House. We would never do this kind of thing to our allies, and we're firing the person that did it. And that's going to tell every other American ally, yo, dude, listen, we get it. This was beyond the pale. But even then, every ally, South Korea, Japan, right? They're going to scratch their head and they're going to go, yeah, you think they're going to try this again? You think if things get tight for the U.S. fiscally, you think they're going to try this again? Mail us a bill for 50 years of protecting them? Like, yeah. So this is exactly what you would expect. Now, let's talk a little bit about the fallout. Now, here's where things are interesting, is because nobody seems to be in good shape, right? I pulled up this video here because this is Marco Rubio. It's a quick clip, but I want you guys to just give it a listen. The question he gets is did you walk away from this meeting convinced the Russians want peace? And just listen to his response. I'm going to try to keep it limited because otherwise Forbes is going to claim it, right? But just listen.
Think is a good thing.
Did you walk away from this meeting convinced the Russians want peace? You said it might take some time to be convinced of that. How are you seeing it now?
I mean, I don't view diplomacy.
Okay. The question is pretty simple. Do the Russians want peace? This is something very simple. And here's the crazy part is that a yes is easy, right? And obviously it's also apparently, like, it's eminently true that the Russians want victory. And like, to them, they'll say, yeah, we want peace. We want this war to end. This war is like war bad, right? War bad is like so evident. But listen to his response, right? All Russia had to do is be like, yeah, the war's bad. We'd prefer to not be in this war. We'd prefer to not be sanctioned. But listen to what Rubio says and look at his face. You can see exactly how these talks went.
Diplomacy that way. I think diplomacy ultimately is based on actions. It's based on commitments that are kept. So I think I came away today convinced that they are willing to begin to engage in a serious process to
Okay, did you notice that? He didn't say, he literally caught himself. He said, I was convinced that the Russians want to begin a serious process. Guys, guess what? I'm here to tell you, war is a serious process. It's the most serious process because you kill people at an industrial scale. So, boy, the takeaway is actually Rubio is not a goofball. Rubio is a career government official who survives and thrives in a changing environment. And like for that, he deserves credit. And you don't do that by not being able to read your opponents. Some of these other guys, they're a mixed bag. But I trust Rubio to understand what it's like to sit across from a party and know that they may not be saying everything they're thinking.
Determine how and how quickly and through what mechanism can an end be brought to this war. Whether we can ultimately reach that outcome will obviously depend on every side in this conflict's willingness to agree to certain things. So I think it's important to have this meeting because we haven't really had much engagement with the Russians for almost 3 years.
Right. And Rubio continues to say, again, what I think is the right things, which is to say, yeah, this is about engagement. This is just about engagement, right? But you notice that's a really low bar. And what he never, ever says in this entire interview is that the Russians are actually interested in achieving peace. And why would they be, right? Because you notice here, Putin says, yeah, I'll talk with Zelensky, but there are legal aspects related to his legitimacy that must be considered, which if taken with other Kremlin statements where they've talked about the legitimacy of Zelensky, they've said previously, Putin has said, I can't sit across from Zelensky because he's not the legitimate president of Ukraine. That is a Russian talking point. And this is a Russian propaganda. Again, if Zelensky wasn't the legitimate president of Ukraine, the Ukrainian parliament would just kick him out. That's something they would do easily. But again, as they point out, in the Ukrainian law and Ukrainian constitution, martial law means that elections are impossible and are suspended, and terms are extended because you can't hold an election in occupied regions, right? Those people in Crimea, in Zaporizhia, in Donetsk, in Luhansk, they are Ukrainian citizens. They have a right to vote. And you can't hold an election when you've cleaved off, when you cannot physically get the state to allow those elections to happen. And it's one of the things that Putin wants. Putin wants there to be a Ukrainian election because what he's going to do, he's going to not allow ballots to be counted in Zaporizhia or Donetsk or any of the occupied regions. Then he's going to go to them. He's probably going to hold his own elections there, and he's going to go, wow, they all voted for independence. Wow. And And he's going to go, look, the Ukrainians voted without you. The Ukrainians voted without you. It's because they think it's because the residents of these occupied territories, don't matter to them. They've abandoned you. So now you're part of Russia. So this whole game is something that Russia wants. They're rooting for it. They're thrilled that they are going to continue the war. And it is eminently clear because they are continuing mobilization, they are deploying commands, they are restructuring their forces that clearly indicate that they plan on being here for years, right? You don't anchor an entire army group headquarters. You don't pick them up and move them when you think that the war is weeks away from being in a ceasefire, right? And Russia's doing just that. And Rubio made it clear, Russia isn't really interested in peace because think about it. Russia wasn't willing to negotiate when America and Europe were like this. When they said, we are 100% behind Ukraine, we have a bulleted list of peace deal points that are essential, non-negotiables. The whole West was like, no, we have one united front in Ukraine. And Russia still was like, we're going to keep fighting until we get something that passes for a victory. Now, the West is totally fragmented. Everybody's losing their mind. Ukraine is like, dude, the U.S. is going to colonize us or whatever. Why would Russia stop now? Why would Russia stop when they have momentum in their favor? They think maybe we haven't been ambitious enough. Ukraine's partners, their allies, they're going to fall apart in front. They're falling apart in front of us, right? They see these negotiations, particularly in context, as acts of desperation. That's what Putin feels they are, is just that there's huge cracks in the Western alliance, that they can finally get Ukraine politically isolated, and then they can kill them off. They can kill off Ukraine as an independent state, right? Install a puppet government, or maybe hold some fake elections that they then install their puppet leader, or they just literally declare, half of Ukraine to be Russia. They have so many options, but why on earth would they to cut a deal now when things are getting better and better if you're Putin? And again, to illustrate what I'm talking about, Zelensky has said he is not going to set foot in Saudi Arabia because he says it's not to create, quote, the false impression of negotiations by visiting Saudi Arabia. But I think the real story is I can't endorse the U.S. after having done this absolutely fucking insane deal, right? After having disrespected us very publicly by trying to extract all of our resources and send us a bill for the aid you've provided. I can't sit there and endorse any part of this because, again, the U.S. has never said that there's a security guarantee. And Ukraine has said this is a non-negotiable to end the war. We need a guarantee that when Russia restarts it, and it's when, not if, that we will have our allies at our back. Otherwise, it's just any deal is going to be just an excuse for the West to abandon Ukraine and for Putin to charge up his forces and in 6 months reinvade Ukraine, right? Anyway, guys, that is all I had. Join me over on Combat Vet News. Help out the guys at the Atay team at help99.co. And thanks to Bill Collier, Robert Koberg, Guys Marnie, Gina Cresta, Chris Gorsuch, Francis Karius, L90, Petra Taru. I'll see you guys tomorrow for another video with more probably absolutely insane fucking news. And thank you guys for being supporters. I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.